Hello and welcome to the video. So the idea of this video is to be able to start with a series of videos where we'll go through all the steps of the walkthrough from the SAP UI5 documentation. So we'll go step by step, one by one. In this video, I intend to cover step 1 and step 2 of the walkthrough tutorial. So in the walkthrough tutorial, what you will find is that you will find the fundamental concepts of developing SAP UI5 application. So if you are completely new to SAP UI5, I would highly recommend to go through the walkthrough tutorial because it has all the step-by-step approach and you can learn SAP UI5 from scratch. So let us go to step 1. In step 1, we will be creating a hello world application. So SAP UI5 it's all about HTML5. So in step 1, we will just create a hello world application with only an HTML page. Okay. So if you have to download the code for this particular step, you can go to this link, walk through step 1. And you can download the application code from here. I have already downloaded the application code, so I'll just open it in my Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio Code is the IDE which we'll be using to run and develop and run all our SAP UI5 applications. So I'll open the folder and I'll open the walkthrough one application. So if you can see in this application, we have a web app folder. So web app folder is the main folder of an SAP UI5 application. This is where all the code of the application resides, which we also called as the resources of the application. So the web app folder is often referred to as the application or the app folder. Inside the app folder here, we have the index.html file. This index.html is a very basic file here, which basically has, head and the body section. In the head, we have some metadata and we have title of the page, SAP UI5 walkthrough. And in the body, we have the div element for hello world. So this is what we have in step 1. This is a basic HTML page just to print hello world on the screen and with SAP UI5 walkthrough as the title. So here it has been mentioned that if you have to create this application, we'll have to create a new folder called web app. So we already have this folder web app here. And so this will contain all the sources of the app we will create throughout this tutorial. So therefore, we refer to this folder as the app folder. So this web app is called the app folder. So what we have to do is that we create an index.html file inside this app folder. So this HTML document basically consists of two sections, the head and the body. The head part basically provides some metadata for the browser and it provides the title of the application. And the body part provides the hello world text. All right. So this is just a basic hello world application with an index.html page. Now we see here that when you download this application code from here, from this particular link, you will see that it has a package.json file and a UI5.yaml file. Now what these two files are doing here and how do we have to use them? For that, I have created a separate video which basically explains what is this UI5.yaml file, why do we need it, how do we use it to run SAP UI5 applications locally in Visual Studio Code, and what is package.json file and why do we need it. So you can go through that video and understand these two files and how do we have to run the applications locally. Here, I will just go through the steps which are needed. I won't be explaining much about it because I have already created a video about it. So what we have to do is that we just, here we put web app, which is basically the folder name here, which is our app folder name. And we have package.json file here. So what we do is we will run the npm install command. So this command, what it will do is basically it checks the dependencies in the package.json file, whatever dependencies have been mentioned, and it loads those, it installs those dependencies in our application project. npm install has run successfully. Now what we have to do is that if we see in the package.json file, the script which is here, and to start the application, we have to run this command UI5 serve. Okay, for you to be able to run this command UI5 serve, you will have to install UI5 CLI in your machine. Okay. So before running UI5 serve command here, there is another prerequisite, is that inside the web app folder, we have to create a manifest.json file. Okay. And for the contents of the manifest.json file, I already have a very basic version of the manifest.json file, which has the bare minimum details. So I'll just put the relevant information here. So we have the manifest.json file. We have executed npm install command. Now we will just run the UI5 serve command. So once we have run UI5 serve command, what it has done, it has started a local server in our system, and we can see and run the application by clicking on this link, localhost 8080. So it has opened up in this browser, and we just click on index.html, and you can see that hello world we can see here on the screen. So this is basically coming from the index.html document. Here in the div, we have mentioned hello world. In the title, we have mentioned SAP UI5 walkthrough. We can see SAP UI5 walkthrough on the top of the screen. So this is step one. Basically, it doesn't do anything specifically related to SAP UI5, as in what I mean by that is it doesn't even invoke or load the SAP UI5 core library. It is just a plain HTML page, and we are just running it using UI5 CLI by running this command called UI5 serve. So that is about step one. Now we will go to step two. So in step two is about bootstrapping SAP UI5. So before we can do something with SAP UI5, we need to load and initialize it. This process of loading and initializing SAP UI5 is called bootstrapping. Okay, so this is what bootstrapping is, and this is what we'll be doing in step number two. So what is SAP UI5? It has been mentioned here that SAP UI5 is a JavaScript library that can either be loaded from the same web server where the app resides or from a different server. Okay. So basically, we have to load the SAP UI5 JavaScript library for us to be able to do anything with SAP UI5. All right. So this is these are the changes which have been done in the index.html file for bootstrapping purpose. Now, again, for you to be able to download this code for step two, you can click on this link, and you can download the code from here. Yeah. All right. For me, I have already downloaded the code. So I will open that application folder in Visual Studio Code IDE. So I've opened the step number two in Visual Studio Code. So we will just go through this code, and we will go through the documentation also, and we'll understand how SAP UI5 is getting bootstrapped. Okay, so you see here this script which has been introduced inside the index.html file. This script is responsible for bootstrapping SAP UI5 core library for our application. Okay, so here we have the src tag inside this script. This src tag, so whatever we put here in the src tag, this contents, this basically will tell the browser from where it has to load the SAP UI5 core library. Okay. So we'll just go through this note. Here it says that SAP UI5 is a JavaScript library that can either be loaded from the same web server where the app resides. Okay, either it can be loaded from the same web server where this application has been deployed, or from a different server, or from a remote server. Okay, now if SAP UI5 is deployed somewhere else on the server, which means somewhere else on the same server, or you want to use a different server, then you need to adjust the corresponding paths in the bootstrap here for this src attribute in this tutorial according to your own requirements. So here basically we are basically loading SAP UI5 library using this reference URL. Okay, I'll explain how this particular URL will load the SAP UI5 library. But the main point is that whatever link or whatever URL we mention here in the SRC attribute, the browser will load the SAP UI5 library framework from that particular location. Okay. Now, SAP UI5 controls support different themes. So whatever themes you need for your application, whatever SAP UI5 themes you need for your application, you can mention that particular theme here in this particular attribute. Okay. Now this is the libs data SAP UI libs attribute. Here we have mentioned sap.m. So here we basically mention that which libraries, okay, from the SAP UI5 set of core libraries do we need for our application. So, okay, so when SAP UI5 core libraries are loaded, it has a lot of libraries for us to use in our application. So in here, we need sap.m library from the SAP UI5 framework. That is what we are mentioning here. And it has been mentioned here also, we specify the required UI library, sap.m, containing the UI controls we need for this tutorial. So why do we need sap.m library? Because when we'll go further in the code, we'll understand that we are using some of the controls which are provided by the sap.m library of SAP UI5. All right. Then, to make use of the most recent functionality of SAP UI5, we define the compatibility version as edge. So here we have defined the compatibility version as edge. Here in this attribute, data SAP UI async equals true. Here what we are saying is that the SAP UI5 bootstrapping process has to be an asynchronous process. So it has been mentioned here. We configure the process of bootstrapping to run asynchronously. This means that the SAP UI5 resources can be loaded simultaneously in the background for performance reasons. So it is a good practice to load SAP UI5 resources in the background asynchronously. Now, coming to this attribute, data SAP UI resource routes. So here what we are telling is that we tell SAP UI5 core that resources in this namespace sap.ui.demo.walkthrough. So this is the namespace for our application. So resources in this namespace, all right, which means resources of this particular application are located in the same folder as the index.html folder, and that is the web app folder. So because here we have just mentioned /, this means that the resources are available in the same folder as the index.html file. Now coming to this attribute, data SAP UI on init. Here we define the module to be loaded initially in a declarative way. So this is the module which has to be loaded initially by the application. And what is the module? The module is, this is the path of the module, basically our application / index. So this is the index.js file. So this is the file. So it is saying that this module has to be loaded initially in our application. So with this, we avoid directly executable JavaScript code in the HTML file. This makes your app more secure. We will create the JavaScript that this references to further down in this step. Okay, that is fine. We already have the index.js file. We have already downloaded it. Okay, so these are the description of the attributes of this particular script tag. And this script is responsible for bootstrapping SAP UI5 core library in our application. Now, we have the index.js file. In this index.js file, it will contain the application logic for this tutorial step. At this point of time, we may not pay a lot of attention to what logic is written here, because when we go to other tutorials further down the road, we'll understand that what sap.ui.define is and what it is being done here. But the important point is that whenever this module will be executed, it will give an alert for us that UI5 is ready. And once we see this alert, so this means that we have successfully loaded, we have successfully bootstrapped SAP UI5 library in our application. So this script, this index.js script will be called by the index.html file. All right. Now we will run this application as well. Again, to run this application, the steps are same. Okay, we have to run this application using the UI5 serve command. And how do we do that? What are the basics of the UI5 serve command? What are the basics of UI5 CLI and UI5.yaml file? Again, you have to go and check my previous video. I have already provided that link in the description box. So here again, I put web app, which is the folder where all the resources of my application resides. Then I have the package.json file. So here I'll again run npm install command. Okay, npm install command has run successfully. Now, okay, before running UI5 serve command, we have to have a manifest.json file here. So we have our manifest.json file available with us. Now there is another very important thing we have to do before we are able to run the application. So here we see that in the SRC attribute, we have a relative path, okay, to load the SAP UI5 core libraries. Now, for our application to be able to load SAP UI5 library from this relative path, uh, we need to do some prerequisite steps, okay, because um, basically the SAP UI5 core library has to be available in this particular relative path. Okay, when I say relative path, I mean the path starting with dot and /. This means that we are not loading the SAP UI5 library from a remote server or from a remote URL. We are loading the SAP UI5 library in this case uh, from a relative path, basically, which is relative to our current application. All right. So basically the point is here, as it says, that if SAP UI5 is deployed somewhere else on the server, okay, so in this case, we can say that we will be loading SAP UI5 from the same application folder. Okay, that is why we have this relative path here. If we were downloading or invoking SAP UI5 library from an external server or from a different server, then we will give a fully qualified URL here, like how it has been given here, HTTPS. So this is a fully qualified URL, and if we have this kind of a URL in the SRC attribute, this means that we are loading SAP UI5 library from a remote server. But in this case, we are not loading it from the remote server, at least from this script point of view. All right, at least from this bootstrapping point of view. Now, for us to be able to run this application, we need to have SAP UI5 library available in our application. So for how do we do that? For us to be able to do that, this UI5.yaml file will help us. So I have a sample UI5.yaml file, and I will just make changes to this file. So here what I have done is I have added these lines, framework SAP UI5. So this UI5.yaml file, uh, it has the information that as SAP UI5 framework is needed, this version is needed, and what libraries are needed for our application to run. So once we have this content of the UI5.yaml file available with us, then if we run UI5 serve command, what UI5 serve command will do is that it will basically, you can say it will install or it will download the required libraries in our application. Okay, so UI5 serve. Now I'll run the UI5 serve command. So you can see it says that the server has started. Okay, so this is a mandatory step which you have to do before you can run SAP UI5 application locally in your system by invoking or by bootstrapping the SAP UI5 library. So this is really important, this SRC attribute and what type of value you provide here. And if you provide a relative URL like this, then in the UI5.yaml file, you need to have this information available, and then you can run the UI5 serve command. So now I'll just click on the localhost URL, and we'll click on index.html. And we can see that we are getting an alert which says UI5 is ready. Okay. So our UI5 library has been loaded successfully. Our SAP.m library has loaded successfully. And whatever code we have here, which says alert UI5 ready, this code is getting triggered, and we can see that alert in our localhost application. So this is what I wanted to cover in this video, where we have gone through step 1 and step 2. Okay, I highly recommend you to go through the other video which I have already created, which will explain in detail the contents of UI5.yaml file and UI5 CLI, and how are we running this application locally using the UI5 serve command, so that you will have a good understanding of running these applications locally. Thank you for watching the video. I'll try to create more videos and cover all the walkthrough steps in the video tutorials. Thank you and have a nice day.